Anyway, let's change tack. Eddie O'Sullivan. Irish coach 2001 to 08 and 3 Triple Crowns in there, 2 World Cups, got to the quarterfinals in 03 and then did what we did in 07. Thank you so much for your time, buddy. Look, a couple of thoughts from the first test before we ask you to break down what's going to happen in Dunedin.
Yeah, it was the scoreline looked pretty grim, 42-19, and Ireland really weren't in the game after the first 20 minutes, so it looked pretty bad. But I think on a balance, I think a few things got away from Ireland and it really hurt them. I think the set piece is a problem. The scrum, surprisingly, New Zealand were after Ireland on Ireland's speed and were quite successful disrupting the scrum. The lineup got very sloppy for Ireland, which is very unusual. Paul O'Connell usually has that lineup homing, and that went a bit awry, especially as the game went on. And I think the killer was that second quarter where they just doubled down on their mistakes, and New Zealand don't miss opportunities like that. So that's why the game was over at half time. But I think some positives for Ireland were they looked kind of dangerous at times when they were patient and they found their shape. I mean, Ireland's first try was a great try, 18 phases and Ireland scores, and they had some really good opportunities in the second half, just couldn't make it stick, But I think they'll see light at the end of the tunnel if they can sort out their set piece. If they can, and that's going to be a big if, because I think New Zealand will go at it again. But that said, they know they got to fix that. I think they've got to be a bit more patient in possession, hold their shape, and they look like they can maybe pick New Zealand apart for a few scores. But it's all to play for. But I think New Zealand will get better as well, as they always do after the first test. So it's a tall order. But it's going to be an interesting game, because if New Zealand roll Ireland on the weekend, it's going to be a long week to finish the season in New Zealand for all the Irish boys.
Eddie, one thing that we are fearful of down here in New Zealand with the All Blacks, and we saw it in the semi-final against England in Tokyo, and we've seen it subsequently since, that teams, I don't know whether they've worked out a blueprint for us, but they realise that we are vulnerable. If you hold the ball, you keep the ball, you repeat your phases, as you've just said, because we really struggled to get going and get any forward momentum in that 20 minutes. So, that just preventing us from playing, because we are going to punish you. I mean, we're probably the best counter-attack team in the world. It's like a football side, isn't it? That, actually, packs the defence and then actually hits you on the break and just sucker punches you. We seem to be brilliant at that kind of rugby. But in terms of the arm wrestle, not as convinced still down here that we're actually going to be super competitive, if you agree.
Well, I think to unpack that, there's a couple of issues there. One, I think, is that, we know New Zealand, their conversion rate in possession is very high. Like, they don't have to have a lot of yardage on the board to score tries. So in terms of tries per yardage, they are very, very efficient. That's starting from set piece or whatever. And also, if you make mistakes, they're incredibly clinical with errors. You turn over the ball and bada bing, bada boom, you're behind the post. And their skill set's so good. So that's their strength, and everybody knows that. But you're dead right. If you can hold on to possession, take them through the phases, and keep your shape, because it's when you lose your shape, you make the mistake and give them back the ball, and then you get punished for it. You saw Ireland keeping their shape, particularly in Dublin last November. And here's a factor. I don't know if you talk about this in New Zealand, but I've done a bit of a deep dive on New Zealand's defence. And it's not a pretty good defence in international terms. The average points conceded by New Zealand in test games is 19 points. Ironically, that was what Ireland scored last weekend. The problem for teams playing New Zealand is if New Zealand concede 19, they can often score 29 or 39, so it's not an issue. But you saw in Dublin last November, Ireland kept New Zealand's score below 19 points, and they took the game. New Zealand defensively, they tend to have a very, an individual style defence. They play a system that gives players a lot of latitude to make individual decisions. And I think if you're patient at times, you can pick people off when they come out of the line or they don't tag on. But you've got to be patient. But I think you saw that even last week. What happened to New Zealand and Dublin is they played a very aggressive, what we call an up and in defence, and Ireland tore them apart on the outside channels. Now, New Zealand were a bit more circumspect last weekend. They were a little smarter about when they came up and when they pushed. But at times they still look vulnerable. There was still that reticence at times, and they got caught on the corners a couple of times. So I think that's something that New Zealand might look at going forward. Because if they go into an arm wrestle in a World Cup game and they give up 19 points, they've got to score 20. And on a day out where a team locks you down, that might not happen for you. So there's always that risk. I think their defence is something they probably need to look at to give themselves more security going into a World Cup.
Eddie O'Sullivan is with us from Ireland, champion coach, 3 Triple Crowns, coached Ireland between 2001 and 08 and through 2 World Cups. On that as well, just on that defence thing again, the rush speed or the line speed since 2017, I don't have to tell you this, but the Lions figured it out, the box kicks and the rush defence. Yet we saw, didn't we, 3 separate occasions which all resulted in tries at Eden Park. One of them, Aaron Smith just looked for that gap and he took it himself. Another one was a Bowden Barrett chip kick through that Quinn Tupaia got to, and another one was a little kick over the top as well. Trying to kind of nullify that, and it has taken a long time for the All Blacks to figure this out. Do you think that maybe we have figured it out, or perhaps Ireland weren't on their game in terms of that rush defence?
Well, I think it was more to do with the source of possession for New Zealand. If you think Sivo Reese's try was basically an intercept, so that just was a slip up by Ringrose. He threw it past the low, who lost his feet, and Reese was off to the races. The second try that was the grubber kick through was basically a turnover in Irish Rock. So they were kind of in exit mode with a kick, and the ball got turned over. They were flat, and it was a really good spot by Barrett to put that through. It was on a dime from. And then I think Aaron Smith spotted there was nobody behind the rock. So like the defensive errors they made there weren't so much to do with the up and in, but Ireland's defense has been ropey. There's no question. But I think it's improved a bit. Like Ireland were quite good at the Six Nations. I think the try count against Ireland in the Six Nations was like 4 tries in total,
Yep.
So the Irish defence has improved. And they are a bit smarter than they were in terms of when they pull the trigger on the up and in. But I definitely think that Ireland will feel that those 3 tries they gifted New Zealand were the ones they can take away this week. They don't have to give them up. And the other interesting thing was that try, the final try by Gus Soakulu.
Yep.
Akula, I don't know if I've got that right.
No, you got that right. Yep.
Like that was based on the fact that Ireland were under so much pressure at the scrum. The flankers had to be nailed on, or they were going to be on rollerblades. And the fact that the flankers were nailed on, he got a clean run at Joey Carberry, and that was like a dump truck over a bicycle. There was no resistance there. He was under the sticks. And that was all down to the fact that the Irish front 5 were under immense pressure at the scrum, which I think was something that really caught Ireland cold. I mean Ireland know they got a scrimmage against New Zealand, but they didn't think they'd come under so much heat, particularly with their starting front row. It was like you've got Furlong, who's one of the best tight ends in the world. He was under a lot of pressure. And that there was a few penalties coughed up by Porter, So I think that was a kind of a smack in the face for Ireland. But again, they'll feel this week that's something they can get in front of. And the lineup went awry as well. And you see, when you're trying to chase a game as Ireland were, but your primary possession is under pressure, it's pushing a rock up a hill, and the rock gets bigger every minute,
It's so good to hear you say that. Your analysis, it's absolutely brilliant to listen to. I'm sure all our listeners here at the platform are loving it. And look, and that what you're saying also is that this is test match rugby. It's about set piece. It's about maintaining and controlling good front foot ball from that set piece, and also not succumbing to scoreboard pressure. And that's what I wanted to take you back to. When you can see 3 quick tries like that, all of a sudden you are up against it on the scoreboard. And with the All Blacks, if we've got a lead on the scoreboard, you know how good we are at keeping our neck in front.
Yeah, I mean, I think the game was over by half time. But I think that the chink of light for Ireland was, despite the fact they were under pressure in the scrum in the second half, and despite the fact the lineup was kind of coming apart at times, they actually put some good phases of rugby together. And let's not forget, they had New Zealand, with their heels on the goal line for long periods. Yep. And they fluffed 2 pots for tries. Van der Fleer lost the ball in contact when everyone thought he got it down, but it was no question he lost it. And Carberry was held up by a thread, So there was a couple of tries that Ireland left behind them. So I think they'll think, if we hold on to the ball, hold our shape, and patience is the key. There are chinks there that you will get New Zealand, and they will take the first try they scored. I thought was a stonker of a try. It was 18 phases. Ireland on the front foot kept their shape, and New Zealand couldn't do anything about it. So they'll hang on to those moments and try and build on those. But you know what? It'll be all pointless unless the set piece gets figured out and gets sorted. I mean, Paul O'Connell was talking about that this week. I think he was pretty much shocked that things went so awry for them at the set piece, but they know that's a starting point. It's test rugby without a set piece, you don't have a foundation. Without a foundation, you don't build a house, you know.
Eddie O'Sullivan is with us, former Irish coach, on the platform. No Sexton, so that really affected your team after 20 minutes. So you throw him back in. Can he last 80 minutes? Can he play to the level that you need him to play? So that opens a door of hope as well. And the other question I wanted to ask you was Stuart Barnes's comments saying that Sam Cane is no good at number 7. That's caused a bit of a stir here. I don't know whether it was tongue in cheek. I don't know where it came from. Sam Cane is the best number 7 in the country here, and he's our All Black captain, and we're going to defend him to the hilt. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry.
Well, I always smile when referees start talking about areas that they're not really. It'd be like someone saying that they didn't rate Barnes as a referee, didn't understand the laws. No one's going to say that. It's kind of I don't know why he came up with that. I mean, maybe he's had a quiet week or something. But I thought he did a decent game. But I think the one area that maybe Ireland might probably do a bit of, let's say they'll do a bit of pleading to Jack. I think it's Jacob Piper this weekend. Is that I think the ruck got a bit crazy at times. It was very loose, the ruck. There was a lot of loose bodies around. I think it was one of those games. It was incredibly intense at the breakdown, as you would expect at Test rugby level. But I think the referee has got to, kind of set out his stall early, so the players know that this is what's going to happen today. This is not going to happen. But I think maybe it got a little bit of fraught there, and I think Ireland felt that they got bullied a wee bit at the ruck. Maybe they weren't ready for it, but that's up to each team to play what the referee is going to allow. And you're talking about small details, like you get that extra little edge, you can come slightly in the side instead of straight in from the back, or you get to stick around more on the ball. I think there are things that Ireland might have felt that New Zealand played the referee better than they did, and I don't think New Zealand should be apologising for that. That's your job, is to find where the limits are on the day. And at Test rugby, some of those limits are on a knife edge, but the team that's smarter with the referee usually comes out the right side of those battles. And I think Ireland didn't get that particularly good ball they wanted at times, because New Zealand were smart enough to either slow it down or make it a half second slower. So because Ireland had during the Six Nations, Ireland's ruck ball was one of the quickest ruck balls in the championship, and that was a big factor in them and doing having a pretty good Six Nations. But that fluidity wasn't there last weekend, down to the fact the All Blacks targeted the ruck, got away with what they got away with, but that's how it rolls. So it'd be interesting if this weekend, if Jacob Piper interprets things the same way, because then again could have an outcome in terms of New Zealand maybe don't get the ball as quickly as they want, or Ireland get a little bit quicker than they did last week. And that certainly, if Ireland get quicker ball, I think the New Zealand defence comes under more pressure straight away, and maybe there's even more to be had if they keep their shape and keep building phases.